Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. This is MOOC 11, Session 11, Digital Currency and Innovation. I hope that everyone is well today. We have some questions here. I don't think quite enough to get us through the hour, so I'm going to keep an eye on the live chat. And if there are other things we should talk about in the live chat, let me know. And we'll see what people are interested in. The first question: what is the current status of the crypto world? Innovators, early adopters, or early majority? This is a good question. We have had this question asked, I think, every single MOOC since we started. And I think I have a clear point of view now for crypto. And that point of view is that we're in the early adopters phase. We have definitely passed the innovators phase. I know many relatively conventional people who now own some crypto or have somehow engaged with the topic. We are for sure into that category. And that's what it feels like qualitatively. But I think it also is where we are quantitatively. So, and none of these, quantitative categories are exactly totally right, but some people like to think that early adopters is 2.5%, right? Something like 2.5% of the population. I think that matches very closely to estimates of how many people own crypto. Like the United States is 330 million people. 2.5% is 8-9 million people. We see estimates of 10 million people owning some crypto. It's hard to get a great sense of these estimates because one person could have multiple wallets or multiple addresses. Multiple people through an exchange or a custodial wallet could be using one address or one wallet. So there's not a super wonderful methodology for figuring out exactly how many people own crypto, but I think within orders of magnitude, people can get there, right? Like it's not 1 million, it's not 100 million. Is it around 10 million in the United States or maybe 10 million globally? Or yeah, it's something like that. So I think that's where we are. I think we're clearly in early adopter land. And we're in early adopter land for cryptocurrency defined for the consumer. There's a different way to answer this question, which is the broader blockchain answer to this question. And there the customer might be enterprises. When we talk about blockchain for the supply chain or blockchain for settlement of derivative contracts or blockchain for governmental transparency, I think there we're still in the innovators category. Very few things have gone into production. Very few. A lot of things are in proof of concept. Certainly 2.5% of the world businesses have not implemented a blockchain project or anything close to that, right? You're talking about primarily the large companies that have meaningful R&D budgets, want to play around with new ideas because they might be important, and so on. So I would say for enterprise blockchain, we're still at innovator stage, not at early adopter stage. Okay. Next question. Developing countries should have urgency of creating innovation in digital currency as their economies are not beneficial to traditional capital formation markets. Their assets are not truly discovered and leveraged. innovation in STOs, securitized tokens, security tokens, may help them participate properly in the global financial system. Comments? Well, I have comments. I agree with the first part. So the first part effectively is saying that in a lot of developing countries, capital markets are not well developed, capital formation are not well developed, and you can't properly finance projects. And there are even some very simple examples of this, right? There was some great work done by De Soto regarding informal ownership on the purely residential side, right? On the purely residential side, informal ownership of property. It says, you know, something like 50% of the developing world. I think that's right, though. I might be making that up, but it's a very large number. Do not have proper title to their residential property where they live. And when you don't, it creates all types of problems. First of all, you can't sell it. Second of all, you can't easily move because you can't sell it. So if there's a better job 2 towns over, and then you're in America and there's a better job, you sell your house, there's a well-developed market to sell your house, you move to the next country, you buy another house, it's fine. Like the home process is not a hindrance to labor mobility. If you have acquired informal rights in your property and you do not have the ability to formalize them, most of the way you're going to keep your property is by staying in it, not moving. And so that hinders labor mobility. And why do you care about labor mobility? It hinders the best matching of people to business opportunities or people to the jobs or work that best maximizes their skills, because it's not necessarily likely that wherever you happen to be born is exactly the right address in the world that will best maximize your skills, whatever they are, if you're a stockbroker or a ballerina or anything in between, right? And then you can't, of course, do normal financial transactions, right? You can't take a home equity loan. You can't buy this property with a mortgage. You can't, and these financing transactions help, again, matching assets with their owners better. If you get assets better matched with owners, you get more liquid markets, you get better matched markets. And when you have those, you end up with higher asset prices. Why do you get higher asset prices? Well, if only, think of it this way. If I said, I have this bottle of water, and I have to sell it right now, and I can't sell it to anyone here in Cyprus who wants a drink, but I can only sell it to a subset of people, some arbitrary subset of people. Likely the price I'm going to get for that bottle of water will be lower, because at the point I want to sell it, maybe none of those people want a drink. Maybe they've just had a soda. Maybe they have their own bottle of water. And so I'll have to drop the price to where it needs to be to get one of that small subset of buyers to buy. So as you make assets more financeable, you get better societal matching, and the prices of the assets tends to go up. So this is for sure a problem in developing countries, right? This is, and the story of the last 50 years in the United States has been more and more financialization of the economy, as investment bankers, in their process of finding new products to sell, find more and more ways that they can take things that were previously not easily financial assets and convert them into financial assets. And once you convert them into financial assets instead of physical assets, it becomes much easier to slice them, dice them, sell them, buy them, trade them, leverage them, hedge them, and so on. I think it's net a good thing. I know people complain about Wall Street, but I think net, it increases societal utility and well-being. Now, are tokens a potential answer to this system for developing countries? And I'm going to say potentially yes, with reservations, but question mark if it will happen. So why do I say potentially yes with reservations? I believe the costs of effectively securitizing an asset through a token offering will be lower than the cost of securing an asset the way you typically do it today on Wall Street, right? If you want to make a some type of synthetic security, you're bundling a bunch of assets to make some type of security, you need to be generally operating in the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, depending on what it is, for the economics of pulling it together to make sense. So that excludes, even in the developed world, a lot of assets from this securitization, in effect. This is even more true if you're in a developing country. So if you said, oh, I really would like to bundle, I don't know, 5 hotels in some city in, pick your developing country, and it's probably not economically efficient to do it the way we are now. And so it doesn't happen, and so on. So in theory, this should be more economically efficient. Now, why do I say in theory? For this to work, you need a legal framework. You need expertise in the country, how to do it. You need then confidence of investors around the world that if you do this, that your system works, that if your system works, people are getting the rights that they expect to get from this token. And so the with reservations part is that it's not just the technology that's going to be the issue, right? Like the tricky thing with these types of products is they're non-native to the internet, right? They're not native to the protocol. Bitcoin is native to the protocol. It is accurate to say that if you own the private key to an address that has 1 Bitcoin, for all intents and purposes, you own that Bitcoin, you control what happens with Bitcoin, you can send it where you want, you can keep it as it is, and you don't need to trust anyone to do that, right? And that's true for Bitcoin. It's true for Ethereum. It's true for anything that is a native token in a digital blockchain cryptocurrency system. If you're going to say, here's a token, and this token represents 1/1,000,000th of the revenue or the ownership of this hotel, that's harder. Because owning the token doesn't natively give you the hotel. You have counterparty risk. You have some type of trust that you need to trust in the system that says this token represents 1/1,000,000th of the revenue of the hotel. And if someone doesn't deliver that, what's my remedy? Is it automated? Probably not. Do I have to go to court? Probably yes. Does a country that not have a well-functioning financial system, is it likely that it has a well-functioning and fast and efficient legal system? Again, I don't want to generalize. Maybe it does, but usually not. Right? These parts of business capacity or legal capacity, financial capacity tend to grow together. Again, it's not a perfect match. The correlation is not 1, but it's certainly correlated. So even if you do all these things, you're not going to leapfrog immediately and be the next Wall Street, because some of the reasons that are causing the underdevelopment of the financial sector in your country already will continue to make it difficult for a third country investor to say, I am going to believe in this token. I am going to believe that I have picked up X percentage of the value of Y hotel in Z country. So it's a little difficult. But it'll be better than the current situation. Like, a little difficult means there'll be a effective discount on that token, on that hotel, versus if it was, in Switzerland, where people are comfortable that the legal system works as it should. Now, so it's a good strategy. I would still do it. Let's go to the next problem, though. This is historically unlikely to happen. Doesn't mean that's what should happen. It should actually happen. Like, the right way to run a developing country, or a smaller company, or a company in a developing country, if you want to compete with more developed, you can't play their own game. You have to try and take the next step, try to leapfrog them, right? Try to go a step forward, try and take a little bit more risk in order to get ahead of them. But historically, that does not happen, because look at who is passing legislation today for tokens and cryptocurrency and so on. Switzerland, France, Singapore, United States, Malta, Luxembourg. These are developed world countries and developed world countries that are focused on the financial sector. There are developed world countries that look at this and say, oh, this is the future of finance. We want to participate in the future of finance. We are Luxembourgish and we don't want to lose this sector to the Swiss. So we're going to hurry to get our legislation in place before they get their legislation in place. And because we're already a sophisticated financial sector, our government knows that we should pass legislation like this, and our regulators have knowledge of approximately how people should expect this legislation to look, and our accountants and lawyers and business people all can contribute to that process. And once the legislation passes, they know how to build businesses that takes advantage of the legislation, and so on. And so, unfortunately, and it's a sad unfortunately, this mostly does not happen. And it does not happen because if you've already developed a well-functioning financial sector, you have the institutional and societal knowledge base that makes it more likely you will jump into the next stage of innovation in digital securitized financial services. It is not typically what some of the dreamers say. Right? Like, some of the dreamers believe that, yeah, well, this is great. We're unbanked and we're going to get banked and it's going to help the unbanked. So far, that has not been the case. So far, the more cynical, realistic view has turned out to be more accurate. If you look at where most cryptocurrency is held, it's in wealthy places. If Bitcoin is an early adopter phase in the United States and in Korea and in Japan and so on, it's probably an innovator phase in some less developed country, because there's just a smaller pool of people that are likely to hear about it and likely to take interest in it and likely to have some excess capital to risk on it. Right? It's one thing to say, oh, I'm going to take 5% of my 401k where I've saved up a bunch of money for retirement and put it in this asset. It's another part to say, like, I'm living day to day My salary is barely covering my weekly needs, and now I'm going to say, look, let me check out if I put some of this in Bitcoin, what's going to happen? And I probably don't have a computer, and it's probably hard for me to sign up for an exchange, and what exchange works with my local currency, and. So it's tricky. I don't think there are great, like we'll be lucky if 2 or 3 countries of the 150 that could use this to get ahead will do it. I don't think the number's going to be 0. I think somewhere you will end up with a forward-looking politician with sufficient vision and understanding who will push it through in his or her country. But I don't think it's going to be the normal case of how it will work. It might work in the other direction. So what do I mean by that? Let's take an extreme example. Encyclopedias. When I was a kid, I was growing up in the States, we were exactly the type of family that thought it was a very important thing to save up and buy an Encyclopedia Britannica. And it was, I don't know how much it was then, $1,000. It was a big purchase. Well, this was a big purchase for us. I think it was a big purchase for a lot of families like us. But it represented knowledge and education, and I was going to junior high school or high school, and I needed to do my studies, and to do my studies appropriately, if I needed to look up what the Napoleonic Wars were, well, here I have in my bookshelf 20 different volumes, and I pull out chapter N, and I look up Napoleonic, and so on and so forth. Obviously, this whole concept got wiped out by Wikipedia. And also, obviously, Wikipedia was first adopted not in developing nations. I believe that if you looked and said, were there more per capita users at year 3 of Wikipedia in Silicon Valley or in Bangladesh? No, it's probably more in Silicon Valley. So why? Because they had internet access, and they heard about this cool new startup, and people wanted to check it out, and so on. So the developed countries started first. But arguably, the developing countries benefited more because it lowered the cost. In that case, it lowered the marginal cost to 0. In an upper middle class household in Silicon Valley, sure, it was nicer to have Wikipedia than Encyclopedia Britannica. It's more convenient. It's free. You can get on your phone. It's this broader set of subjects. So those are benefits. But you might have had Encyclopedia Britannica anyway. So you haven't moved from the bucket of, I didn't have an encyclopedia, and now I have an encyclopedia. I had an expensive encyclopedia, now I have a free encyclopedia. But a working class household in Dhaka probably didn't have an Encyclopedia Britannica before, but now does have access to Wikipedia. So they went from not having an encyclopedia to having an encyclopedia. And so this might play out this way, that you will have the fact that it lowers the cost of financializing or securitizing assets will ultimately have a bigger impact in developing countries, even if it doesn't start in developing countries. Like the system might end up getting perfected in developed countries, and then it will be adopted in developing countries. And in developing countries where before it was cost ineffective to securitize something, maybe with a token-based system it will become cost effective. And so in relative terms, it might have a bigger impact because you're going from 0 to 1, as Peter Thiel says. Whereas in developed countries, you're doing the same thing, you're just doing it more efficiently or effectively. Um, someone notes in the comment, Everpedia is built on EOS. Yeah, it's funny. A wiki type system matched with a blockchain type system. All right, the next question. What do you think about initial exchange offering? Is this a type of innovation? Is it possible for U.S. residents to buy this? So an IEO is an ICO administered through an exchange, a summary level. You see this, and Binance is doing it, and OKCoin, and some of the more ambitious, aggressive exchanges are doing it. They make some listing fees. They're effectively providing more distribution to the issuer in exchange for the exchange making some money. I don't think it's some type of radical new transformative innovation relative to an ICO. I think it is an ICO in a different format-ish, sort of. I don't know if any of the major US exchanges have done this yet. Now, what do I mean by that? Could you go to a non-US exchange and do it? It depends if they allow US citizens or they realize you're a US citizen or resident. But it is something that has happened initially offshore from the United States. But it probably will filter in eventually to the United States. For sure, this comes 100% under the coverage of the Securities and Exchange Commission. All right, for sure, the exchange needs to be a broker-dealer, maybe it needs to be a registered exchange to do it. So this will end up being a highly regulated area, even by the standards of financially regulated areas within crypto and blockchain in the United States. BitMax and Bittrex, Andreas is thrown out as additional ones. Can you take us through traditional crowdfunding versus ICOs versus STOs as process innovations in terms of fundraising? Tough question. I'm not sure each of those is just a process innovation. So crowdfunding has a couple of variations. The first is traditional securities offering, just there's a cap on the amount of money you'll raise, and in exchange for the cap, you don't have to go after accredited investors, which is what we discussed on Monday's session. How a lot of the securities legislation is meant to protect unsophisticated or less wealthy investors. And so the legislation's underlying philosophy is if you don't meet certain income or sophistication thresholds, you shouldn't be buying early startup businesses. It's a little bit paternalistic. The other crowdfunding model that is interesting and non-dilutive to the owners, and I think a little bit more dramatic, is pre-selling products or services. So you see this on Kickstarter. I have invented the new special toaster. It toasts and butters your bread at the exact same time. If you are in the first 1,000 people, you'll get it for $59.99, then it's going to $9.99, but you'll get a commemorative cap, and then it becomes $119 or what have you. I'm not even sure that that version of crowdfunding is simply a process innovation versus the issuance of regular securities just with a cap. Like, that seems like a process innovation, right? Like, if I would issue securities without a cap, if I'm going to accredited investors, and someone says, well, what if we can just sell it to anyone, but there's a cap? That's at most a process innovation, or maybe not even much of innovation at all. Creating a platform to aggregate demand pre the development of the product, so you then have enough confidence and or money to go develop the product. It's pretty good. Right? I'm not sure that's just a process innovation versus financially oriented crowdfunding. I put it as a question mark. I mean, anyway, these things are all judgmental, but I put it as a question mark. I think that feels pretty different to me. It's something that was quite difficult to do pre-internet. And it's hard to aggregate demand in this way without an internet-based platform. So even within crowdfunding itself, the different variations might not just be process innovations. Now, ICOs are initial coin offerings. First one was the Ethereum one. You send Bitcoins, you get Ethereum. This, for sure, to me, is not just a process innovation. It is not crowdfunding made 20% more efficient or effective. This, to me, feels very, very different. It is wholly digital in nature. It runs effectively outside the existing financial system. It runs globally. You get a native token. That native token represents some claims natively. You can transact at least pseudonymously. Whether or not governments like that or put restrictions, different topic, but technically you can do that. And so to me, this is not a process innovation. If this is a process innovation, then Bitcoin itself is a process innovation, and I don't think Bitcoin's a process innovation. What I think is a process innovation is once you have ICOs to do STOs. There, I think it's a process innovation relative to ICOs, right? Because STOs say, oh, we liked this token idea. We like the idea of giving people a digital token and giving them the key to it and allowing them to transact it online. But the token is now not going to represent just a token. It's going to represent shares in Antonis' house. Okay. That seems like a process innovation relative to an ICO. Like an ICO feels like it's not. An STO relative to an ICO is, I think, a process innovation. It's the exact same idea, just applied to a different object. So, and again, everything that I say here, it's judgmental, right? There's no bright line. It's not 2 + 2 = 4, but 3 + 3 = 6. And so that's how you can decide if something's a process innovation or not. But it's my gut feeling about this. Okay, these were the questions I had up front. Let's see if we had any other questions in the chat, or if there's anything someone would like me to speak about. So someone asks, what about the model of airdrop fundraising on EOS? To me, that feels like a process innovation, again, relative to an ICO. It's of the same class of thing. So the same class of thing, but done with a slightly different twist. Okay. Until or unless I get another question, I want to talk about something that was in the reading that I think is super important. And it's one of my main frameworks for thinking about technology, thinking about new technology, and thinking about how to evaluate new technology. And this is one that Chris Dixon had a great essay about. Chris Dixon is a venture capitalist. It was included, I think, in the reading for this week's material. And the title says it all. The next big thing will start out looking like a toy. So this is the theory of disruptive technology. And once you have this framework in your mind, you see a lot of discussions happening and you're like, wow, the discussion online or in the media is just all wrong. And at a summary level, here's how it works. You have a technology. It's mature. It continues to develop. It starts to outstrip the usage needs of the average user. A great example here is Excel. Excel now has an unbelievable set of functionality, an extremely powerful set of functionality that the average user doesn't know about, doesn't care about, can't use, is not interested in using, doesn't serve any interest of the current user, but because the product's mature and people have a tendency to build more things, features keep getting added, and the people who are the Excel experts, the people you're going to call and comment about Excel, like those features. They use them. Now, of course I use a pivot table. Of course I do Monte Carlo analysis in Excel. Who doesn't? It's so powerful. Well, then someone comes along, in this case Google Docs, and offers an online version of Excel, more or less, that basically has none of these features, right? And it looks silly. But it is better at one thing. It's better at collaboration. It's like worse at everything else, but it can be edited together by multiple people at the same time. And what does it turn out that is the main use of Excel? Like if you actually took the most, what do most people use Excel about? We use Excel for. And this is funny because I am not asking what do the sophisticated Excel users use Excel for. What does the median, what does the mode Excel user use Excel for? And the median mode Excel user uses Excel to make a list. Literally to like just list some things in a list. Well, guess what? Google Sheets makes a list really, really well. It has cells, and you can put one thing after another in the list, and that works perfectly fine. And in fact, many times you're making a list to share with other people. And so the fact that when you launched Google Sheets, you could instantly share things with other people, and those other people could be seeing them simultaneously, meant for that one usage case, amazingly, remarkably enough, Google Sheets was better than Excel, even though if you called up any Excel expert, they're like, oh, I could never use Excel. Like, the people are going to comment in the media, the people who are Excel experts, they say, well, it's missing this and it's missing that, and it can't do this and it can't do the other thing. No one's going to use it. And in fact, no one's going to call up the person who's using it as to do a grocery list with their family, because no one's even going to think about calling them. If they thought about calling them, they would say, well, I'm no Excel expert. True. Not really sure I can say anything about this. True. In fact, they might even be embarrassed. They might even be embarrassed that they're using Excel incorrectly. Everyone knows Excel is not for lists. It's for running Monte Carlo simulations, but I don't know. I need to keep my shopping list here. And so you would tend to miss that there are like millions of people that what they actually open up Excel for is like making a list, because like, why would you ever quote that person? Who's going to talk to that person? How is that person going to end up? How's that person going to end up relating to a journalist writing about technology? It's very difficult. And this is a scenario where it's still sort of obvious. There's other scenarios that are much less obvious. The PC. PC was started in a world where companies had big computers that did a lot of things, and you ran them in data centers, and you ran payroll on them or whatever. And then people come up with a PC, and it looks goofy, and it has like a wooden keyboard or something, and you have to attach a TV as a monitor. If you're the guy selling IBM mainframes to the accounting department at General Electric, and it's this big thing that goes in the data center and does many things and comes with sophisticated programs and runs mission-critical enterprise applications, and someone shows you a PC circa 1976, it's a joke. It's a joke. It's a total joke. It's a total joke. This thing's like worse than a mainframe at everything. How are you going to respond? The best case scenario, like actually the best case scenario, is, oh, that's cute. It's a toy. I mean, like, sure, I'll get one for my kid to play at home. But wait, it's $5,000. I'm not even going to get one for my kid. I mean, like, okay, cute. No, I don't want one though, and you can't do any real work on it. Can't run payroll. And so it gets dismissed and ignored. And companies make epic strategic errors. Like you're IBM, and you give the license to the software of PCs to Microsoft. And you don't do that because IBM is generally not an aggressive company, or that IBM leadership isn't full of smart, ambitious, aggressive business leaders. They are. You do that because in 1983 or whenever that happened, it looks harmless to your main business. It's not that important. There's no way IBM would have given the operating system of their mainframes to Microsoft. Be laughed out the room if someone asked them. But this thing, okay, we should get it to market. It's an important hobbyist market by then. It's not just crazy. It's not just a toy. I mean, it's hobbyist, and no one's really paying attention, and we have to focus our resources on the important things. And then it's off and running, and you've created Wintel, like Windows and Intel, and you've handed over a multi-$100 billion industry to someone by mistake. And that mistake is that this thing looks like a toy. So once you have this, you say, well, a lot of things are toys and just are toys. Yeah, it is not a sufficient condition for a disruptive technology to look like a toy. Might be a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. Many things that look like toys or look like bad ideas are actually bad ideas. That's the hard part about being a pundit and venture capitalist or new technology. Like, good ideas in venture capital look like bad ideas, and bad ideas in venture capital look like bad ideas. Also, some bad ideas look like good ideas. It's very complicated. It's not easy. If it was easy, all of us would be wealthy venture capitalists. So what distinguishes things that are toys that then become not toys, I think, is two things. One, there is at least one thing that they are better than the other things for. This is super easy to see with Google Sheets, right? Like, Google Sheets is, on day one, was worse at everything except collaboration. So if I wanted to make a shopping list with the guy down the hallway, even on day one with Google Sheets, it was more useful than doing it in Excel, putting it in an email, sending it over there, having it send it back, and get desynced, and blah, 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 blah. I think that's one point. I think the second point is there is some external trend that will make it better over time automatically. You can see this medium in Google Sheets, but we'll talk about it. In Google Sheets, it's the internet. It gets faster. It gets easier to use. You have lower latency. Every year, the idea of doing something in a browser tab is more plausible than it was the year before. In the beginning, if you told someone 20 years ago, when the internet was ferociously slow, no, you're not going to run Excel locally. You're going to run it through an internet connection. You're like, you're crazy. Like, how would you do that? I'll be waiting there like 2 minutes every time I fill something in the cell. Well, we're progressively getting faster internet connections and better web technologies, and more, there are computers now like Google Chrome where everything runs in a browser, and it'll be more and more true over time. So it's good if you launch a business that looks silly today, but is okay at something. It's really powerful if that's something that it's okay at for reasons not relating to your business. The general ecosystem and environment is going to get better and better and better. It was also the case with PCs. Chips, processing chips, got more powerful every year. People talk about Moore's Law, where they double in capacity at the same price every year. And even that became 18 months. Whether you're doubling every year, doubling every 2 years, if you're doubling, you get exponential improvements. So something that doubles every year is 1,000 times more powerful in a decade. Well, that's really interesting, right? You have the form factor of the PC, and day one, it's sort of useless. It couldn't run payroll. But if a decade later, it's 1,000 times more powerful, you could probably run payroll. The form factor stayed the same, but an underlying technology helped you get better and better and better at what you were doing. And so it's interesting because by the time it's obvious that the chips are now going to allow PCs to take off, it's kind of too late. The firms that have already struggled in the wilderness in the early days, when there weren't obvious customers, when there wasn't a big market, they're the ones that once the curve goes exponential. Once the technology takes off, they're already there. And then they can scale. And then what happens? Some of them become big companies, and some of them don't succeed in scaling operationally and fail, but some of them then get bought. And so, in many ways, while maybe not a formal policy, sometimes a formal policy, maybe not a formal policy, in many ways, big companies, the way the ecosystem works is kind of the only way the ecosystem works, that they outsource a lot of innovation to startups because there's no other way for it to happen. It's very difficult. You're in a big company. You have your budget targets. You have your systems and processes, and they say, like, we have to focus on opportunities of at least 100 million or whatever, or whatever, or whatever. And then someone comes with this like silly looking PC and walks into IBM in 1970 and drop everything, do this. And of course you're not going to drop everything and do this. You have bills to pay, you have rent to pay, you have employees to pay, you have your stock price to keep up. This thing's goofy. It is goofy. The people who can afford to work on this goofy thing at that stage in its development are, college dropouts like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. Those are who work on these topics, not the big IBM monolith. And then, once it's obvious enough, de-risked enough, big enough that a big company could productively buy it, implement it, absorb it, then they come and buy it and they pay like huge amounts of money for it. And people say, oh, well, that's so dumb. Why didn't they buy it when it was 5 years earlier? They could have bought it for 100th of the price. And yeah, that might be true, but that never happens. The reality is that never happens, or it very rarely happens. Because it's just hard with the organizational systems and incentives and procedures for a big company to do that. And so it ends up being easier in practice, even though it's no one's official strategy. I want to look at an opportunity and they could have bought it day one for $1 million and I want to pay $1 billion for it. That's, of course, nobody's strategy, but it's a little bit what happens in practice. And there might not be that much of a way around it because of how organizational incentives are set up. So practically speaking, don't be afraid if you're doing something. Here's a good scenario to be in. You're doing something. It is very good at some little thing, and people are telling you that little thing is trivial. It's a toy. It's a hobby. Oh, it's a cute hobby. Condition 1. Condition 2. The dimension on which that little thing is competing on is improving due to some other reasons outside of your control, but it's definitely improving. Dimension 3, you're horrible at everything else. And everyone tells you you're horrible at everything else. And everyone says, like, oh, how could I ever use your whatever to do whatever? It's missing all these features. A plus B plus C has described most of the most successful companies in technology in the last 30, 40 years. That looks like it might be a horrible situation because people are telling you, like, you're bad, you're not going to work, nobody likes you. Yet that starting point has characterized most of the major victories in technology the last 30 years. Someone asked in the timeline, and I'll just touch on this briefly. In this context, is an innovation in this space, digital currency, blockchain, better managed by hacking your way through rapid prototyping, fail quickly, reboot, iterate, etc., etc., etc.? Look, in general, I think standard startup theory, whether it's blockchains or anything else, is you should, until you find product market fit, which means at some dimension, some set of customers seem to find your proposition attractive. Until you hit that point, you should iterate rapidly. Then once you find that type of product market fit, then you should focus on it and try to scale. But you should be changing quickly to try and find product market fit. So I think we're 1 minute over our time. thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. We have one more session to do before we finish the course, and then April 26th to 29th, we're going to have the final exam. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the next session, but Andreas wanted me to give you a heads up in your planning that those are the dates of the final exam. So have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll be back in touch next week.